Mayik's father was also called Mayik, as was Mayik's father's father. At least, that is what his father said.
Okay, I have a video here showing you how to install this rain droplet effect and this frost vignette for Skyrim. Now, just a heads up, this video may take a little while because I'm going to try to explain everything to the best of my ability. Now, you will need Boris's ENB for this. If your PC is not powerful enough to run a full-fledged ENB, there is a sort of workaround. It still does impact your frame rate, but not nearly as much. For example, with an ENB on, with all the settings, a pretty hard-hitting ENB, I get about 40 frames per second, and with all the 4K texture mods and crap I have. Now, if I turn off the EMB entirely, I get roughly 85 frames per second. And with the lens effect on, I get 78 frames per second or 79, something like that. So it does impact frame rate a little bit, but not nearly as much if you were running an entire EMB with all the effects on. Now, this effect was made for the CR ENB, but with some manual tweaking, you can get it working for most other ENBs, including the default ENB configuration. Now, to do this, you will need ENB 264 or newer. Now, I've been testing this with 279, which is the newest at the time of recording this, because Windows is pretty finicky about which ENB versions it lets you use. I also haven't been able to test this with an ENB injector. I'm sure it works, but I haven't been able to because, unfortunately, Windows 10 only lets you use the ENB wrapper. You will also need ENB weather effects. That's the effect itself, and you'll get it from this website here. Just go to the website and download this link right here. Now, while you're at it, even though you do not need to use the CR ENB preset for this, you will need the ENB files because you're going to use the weather list from the CR ENB. Lastly, if you use your own preset, you'll need those files as well. I'm using Real Vision. The reason I have these other two ENBs here is just to show you some of the problems you may run into and to help me explain them. Okay, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove any pre-existing EMB files from Skyrim's folder. You can back them up if you like. For instance, say this is where your EMB files will be. You could create a folder, and say you're using Real Vision, you just say Real Vision EMB, or just type Real Vision EMB. And then you can go ahead and drag and drop all the folders or all the files into that folder. But I've already removed all of the pre-existing EMB files from my folder here. It's best to just sort by date created, and then you can determine when they were installed and if they go together. Now, this is not absolutely necessary, but I do recommend it. That way, if you run into a problem, you know it wasn't caused by any conflicting file that may have been lingering around inside Skyrim's folder. So yeah, definitely recommend doing this, even though it's not necessary. Now, you're going to want to create a folder. Any folder, new folder, put it anywhere, name it anything you like. I've just called mine folder. And you're going to want to open that up. And let me go ahead and drag this over here. There we go. And what you're going to want to do is first place the core EMB files in there. So as I said, I can't really use the injector version, so I'm going to place the wrapper files in there. And then if you're using an EMB preset, place the EMB preset files in there. If you're not using an EMB preset, you can go ahead and skip this step. Now I'm just going to kind of fast forward or cut to when I'm done doing this because I'm manually installing Real Vision here. And you're going to want to overwrite any files too. So I'm going to overwrite the core EMB files with the Real Vision EMB files. Alright, so I've done that. Now it's worth mentioning that if your EMB preset does require some files that go inside your data folder, you're obviously going to want to install those as well, whether you use Mod Organizer or Mod Manager. Make sure obviously that you get those into your data folder. That's kind of just part of the whole installing an ENB thing, so I figured you kind of know what to do there. Now lastly, you're going to want to place your ENB weather effects files in there. This is the effect itself. You don't need to copy ENB weather resource, you just need to copy these two. And obviously again, overwrite anything that's already in there. Now, Windows is being retarded. There we go. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this part either, but if you want to, you can configure your EMB local and save it. Okay, so now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open the EMB series.ini. I'm going to expand this here. And you're going to want to find enable lens and make sure that's set to true. If not, set it to true. If the line doesn't even exist, make sure you type it in and set it to true. Next, you're going to want to find the enable multiple weathers variable and set that to true as well. And again, add the line if it's not there. Now, if you can't really find this off the bat, just hit Control F and then type multiple weathers, or begin to type it at least, and then say find next, and it'll find it. If you're just using the ENB lens effect, you're going to want to set use original post-processing to true. I'm actually not going to do that, I'll just tell you. And you're going to want to set use original object processing to true. And all the other effects in here besides the ENB lens, you're going to want to set to false. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and save it. I'm going to hit Control S and exit out. Now what you're going to want to do is open up CR Realistic, the EMB there, go to main, go to EMB series, and then open weatherlist.ini. And I'm going to drag that on half of my screen here. And then you're going to want to go to that folder you created, and there'll be an EMB series folder in there too, and open up that weatherlist.ini. And when we're done configuring the weather list, I'm going to go ahead and kind of explain why we're doing it to the best of my ability. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find first weathers 33, well, between 33 and 35, and copy them over and replace weathers 33, 34, and 35 in your weatherlist.ini. So let's Control V there. I'm going to space this the way I like it here. Kind of particular about the way I space things here. Okay. And now go back over to CR ENB's weather list and scroll down till you get to 62 through 70, and you're going to want to copy them over to your weather list. So okay, looking over this video in Vegas, there's a couple things I forgot to add. The first of which is that most EMBs will come with a weather list, and the weathers 1 and 2 will be AAA and BBB, respectively. And the first weather 1 will have this weather code D4886. You're going to want to actually go ahead and copy that down to either between 67 and 69 or 70, because that is actually a rain weather code, and I don't know why it's over up top there. And then you're going to want to erase it from weather 1. One other thing that I forgot to add, let me scroll down here and scroll down here. You can see that weather 34 on CR ENB's weatherlist.ini is COT snow, which is climates of Tamriel snow. So these are all the weather codes for the snow of climates of Tamriel, I believe. And we went ahead and added them. And I would just want to say that that's actually not entirely necessary unless you have climates of Tamriel installed, but it's good to go ahead and copy them over anyway, because if you add climates of Tamriel, you already have those set to go. And if you don't have climates of Tamriel, it doesn't really have any negative effect either. The last thing I want to add is, I'm going to go down all the way over here, and you can see that climates of Tamriel rain is weather number 71. And if you do have climates of Tamriel, or even if you just want to add these weather IDs, you go ahead and copy them over to weather 62. And you want to do the same for weather 72. Copy them over if you like. Then you can go ahead and save your weather list. and I'll get back to the rest of the video now. Now you're going to want to go on your weather list .ini and rename the file names for 33, 34, and 35 to snow.ini. If you're using an EMB that already had the enable multiple weather variables set to true, you're not going to want to rename these to snow.ini. You're going to want to skip ahead a bit, and I'll show you what to do. And you're going to want to do the same for the rain files over here. So rename them to rain.ini. Again, if you have an EMB that uses a custom weather list, you shouldn't be doing this right now. I'll go over that in just a second. Technically, you can use only one file name for all of the weathers, something like default INI or default weather.ini or the name of your ENB.ini, but I like it better this way. So if you want to go ahead and use one configuration file where we're using two, that's just fine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save my weather list here. And if you are using an ENB that uses multiple weathers, like here I have an example is bleak EMB. You'll see that under EMB series are the names of the custom configurations here for rain, snow, and storm. So you're going to want to find the name of the configuration file that your ENB uses for, say, snow, and replace the file names for 33, 34, and 35 with the file name of that configuration. So obviously for this one, with bleak ENB, I type Skyrim snow.ini. And you're going to want to do the same for rain. Now, if you have one that has a specific configuration for a storm and then a specific configuration for rain, you're going to want to set the storm for 67, 68, and 69, and 70. And the standard rain configuration for between 62 and 66. So the use multiple weathers variable enables different EMB presets for different weather types. So for rain, it may be darker and more depressing, and so on and so forth. So setting this as true helps determine when the effect should be used. So the snow effect is set to trigger between weathers 33 and 35, and each of those weathers, 33, 34, and 35, have different intensities. The rain is set to trigger between 62 and 66 for the lowest intensity, then between 67 and 69, and then 70 for the highest intensity. So these three effects have different frequency patterns too. They're not static. In other words, when the raindrop effect is hitting the camera, it's not like the raindrop hits, then it waits a very specific amount of time, then another raindrop hits, and so on and so forth. It's kind of like a more sporadic pattern. So it'll hit, and then 3 will hit in quick succession, and so on and so forth. All of Skyrim's weathers have alphanumeric codes. So between 62 and 66, at least in the CR ENB weather list, you'll find the kind of light rains, because this is when the light rain is set to trigger. And then you'll find the storms between 67 and 69, and the heavier stuff at 70. So in other words, these weather IDs right here belong to weather 63. So what I believe the ENB lens FX file does, and I'm not sure, is that when the weather changes, it checks the weather code, and then it says, oh, is this one of the weather codes that belongs to the weather where I'm enabled? And if so, it enables appropriate effect. If I didn't explain that properly, I'm sorry. There's really no other way I can do it even as accurately as I just did, despite the fact that it may not be that great. So yeah, you're actually done with that step now. Just one last note. Say you have a mod which adds new weather types. Not a mod that alters existing weather, but again, adds new weather types. So say you have a mod that adds like really dark storms and kind of intense lightning and all that stuff. You're going to want to go ahead and add those weather IDs to the appropriate weather. So we know that between weather 67 and 69 are the storm weather IDs, so you'll want to add those codes to the appropriate weathers. So we are done there. Okay, so if you're using an EMB which doesn't use multiple weathers by default, you're going to want to copy your EMB series.ini and paste it to the EMB series folder. Then rename that rain.ini, paste it again, and rename that snow.ini. Because, as you remember, we gave certain weathers certain configurations here. Now, if those configurations didn't exist and weren't already defined, the ENB would just replace those settings with the stock EMB settings. So Real Vision is really vibrant and colorful, and it is that way no matter what because it doesn't use multiple weathers. The configuration never changes. But now, since I'm using Real Vision and I'm enabling multiple weathers, if I weren't to have rain.ini defined here, it would automatically generate the default configuration for the rain INI. So basically, the default EMB looks a little more bleak, and that's basically what it would end up looking like when it rained. And then the setting would change back to what it normally is when it was done raining. Same goes with snow. That's why I said it could be easier for you to just use one configuration file instead of both, the rain and snow. But for me, I like it this way. I don't know why. Now what you're going to want to do is, with all that done, copy the files over to your Skyrim folder. There you go. Okay. Now, you are pretty much done, but you may run into some trouble, and I'm going to go ahead and try to explain a couple things here. If I open up Seasons of Skyrim, it was made to run with version 2.6.2, which is very outdated, so this may be part of the problem. I'm not sure. Either way, if I open it and I go over here, I have DXGI files right here. And I noticed through laboriously, like systematically deleting files and renaming files and changing variables, that the DXGI files do not work with this lens effect, the raindrop and the frost vignette. You can go ahead, if you run into that problem and if your EMB uses the DXGI files, you can rename them or delete them to get the effect to work. But I did notice that at least with Seasons of Skyrim, it made everything a lot darker. It looked overcast when it was really sunny, so it kind of almost made the ENB unusable, which is a downside. So if you do run into that problem, keep that in mind. And another potential problem, I'll go over here, is going to your EMB local, and you can see I have here, it says enable proxy library equals true, and this is just kind of speculation. I'm not entirely sure that this could be a problem, but if you do find that you've done everything the way you should and it's still not working, try doing nothing else but just disabling the proxy library by typing false where it says enable proxy library. Then boot the game up and force a weather and see if it works then. Alright, one last thing I wanted to show you is that you can actually customize the droplet and vignette settings in the embLens.fx.ini file. You will need to run the game to generate all these FX config files, so do that first before you go ahead and try to open up embLens.fx.ini, because obviously it won't be there. So you can obviously customize all these settings, but also if you go to the embLens.fx file and open up that, you can further customize the droplet and vignette settings. So you can read over here, there's a lot of stuff on how to do this, but what was of most use to me is if you go down here, you can see that this is where these variables are added to the config. And you can see that droplet, offset curve, and scale are not added. So you can go ahead and add them just by copying the way this is written here. So first thing you want to do is delete the semicolon and take note of this default value for droplet, offset curve, or for whatever you're changing. I'm noting that this is 1.5, and I'm going to delete that bit. UI name is what it's going to be in the config, the name it's going to have. UI min is the minimum setting you can set it to in the config. Just make that 0. Oops. And don't forget the semicolon at the end. And I'm going to do the same for droplet offset scale. Change the name here. And the default value for droplet offset scale was 0.5. And just make sure everything is written correctly. Because if it's not, for instance, if there's not a semicolon here, it won't regenerate the config file, which is something we're going to need to do. And if you forget to change curve to scale, if you copy and paste it, there'll only be a curve setting and so on and so forth. So you can save it now. Exit out here. Go to EMB series. We're going to need to regenerate the EMB lens.fx.ini file, so delete that and run Skyrim. And obviously quit out right away. And you can see here the EMB lens.fx.ini has been regenerated with our new settings, droplet, offset, curve, and scale. So all that's left to do now is boot up Skyrim and show you the effect and show you how to test it too. Okay, so if I just test this here, I force the weather that I want to test with. So a good weather code to test with is 10A241. So type FW space, then the weather code, and this is a rain code. And you can see I have the droplet effect here. And then I'm going to force some snow. It won't stay long in this region though. I'm in Falkreath. So it's C8221, I believe. And you can see I have the frost vignette. So yeah. That is it. It's probably going to end up being a long guide once I'm done editing this. It's been nearly an hour making this right now, so it's going to be a while editing it. So hope this helped, and thanks for watching.